All right. I want to welcome everyone. My name is Eric Woodie from the Illinois Soy Association. The presentation we have for you today is about containers. It's a pretty important, at ISA we kind of have worked hard to acknowledge the importance of containers for a long time. So we're pretty excited about this presentation and the people that we have here before you, a couple of really experts as far as our panelists are concerned, and talk a little bit about some different aspects related to containers, a little bit about what we see now, how containers move now, and how we see some trends kind of moving forward. So this, as I mentioned, this presentation is brought to you by Illinois Soy Association, the checkoff program there. And some of the examples of some of the strengths that we've seen in our container work over the past 5, 8, 10 years. A great example for us is Southeast Asia. So we've seen 40% increase since 2014 just in our exports and imports into those countries from the U.S. That is predominantly from containerized movement. So a lot of efforts go into that. We think that ISA has been a really strong fostering that program for quite a long time, and it's a big part of my work, so I'm excited to be here. I've spent the last 15 years, most of my career, that makes me feel a little bit old, but most of my career working in container markets, developing container programs, exporting from the U.S., looking for emerging markets, fostering some of our current markets, and it's been a great ride. It's been a lot of fun for me. So this is a great topic for me. I want to thank Rachel Peabody from ISA for inviting me along, because this is a passion for me. So this is quite an honor to be here. I'm going to kick off today's agenda. I'm not going to, the spotlight's not on me as much as I like to talk about containers. I'm going to give it to these guys here in just a few, but I wanted to just give kind of a brief overview about containers, some of the history, some of the things that we see in Illinois, and I'll give it to these guys after. A lot of people don't always know, and they think about containers as being a little bit more of a recent development, but the inception and in the overall movements in containers really started in the 1950s. As far as real high volume grain movements, that's a little bit more recent. It really kind of started in the early 2000s when we saw a lot of soybeans, corn, about anything that you could find in the way of grain moving to Asia and Southeast Asia at some of the higher, really more exciting volumes. So, and we'll get into some of that as we go along, and I'll let some of the smarter guys over here talk. But for the most part, we've seen what we call a 20 or 40 foot container able to move any way possible by trucks, trains, and container vessels. And we'll get into a little bit of detail as we go along. Kind of why we talk about containers, this is a kind of an easy one from a lot of my jobs. So over $4 trillion worth of goods are moved by container each year. That's just a shocking number, I think, to a lot of people that don't work closely with the industry and they see some of these developments over the last 10 years. 52% of the world's goods are moved by containers. Those consist of everything, you name it. They can be grain, obviously, is why we're here, but electronics, particularly as you see imports, edibles, oils, some of the most delicious wines in the world are moved by containers. So it's some of what it's really done is made the world smaller. And as far as consumptive demand is concerned, we can get about anything we want from anywhere in the world, and we can ship about anything we want to anywhere in the world. So this is why we spend so much time in containers and really excited about some of the work we have done and kind of where we see things going. A good visual example that we like to share is a lot of the container ships carry about 11,000 containers, 20-foot containers. And a decent visual for that is if those were loaded on a train, that would stretch 44 miles. We like to think of things in some visual terms. That's kind of how I learn. A lot of people do it a little bit the same. Really important for us and where I spend most of my time, and I think hopefully it was why a lot of you folks are here, is to help develop some of the diversification in our markets. So that's for undertapped or untapped markets. So we feel, and I'll get into a little more details, we feel that this containers provides really the best way to do that efficiently, particularly in reducing shipping times, and I'll get into a little more of some of the better advantages. So for us in Illinois, I represent Illinois. We have a couple of different sort of pieces of the U.S. that'll be kind of represented here, and you'll get a really good look. But for us in Illinois, we're in a really unique position to be able to ship containers about any way you can imagine. So we see them moving down the river, down the Illinois, out of the Gulf. We see them going out of the PNW, California, even some that move out of the St. Lawrence, and then obviously the East Coast as well. So most of those, a vast majority, are going to the major Asian markets. So they're servicing a lot of the ag needs as we see proteins demand increasing in a lot of the areas in Asia. These ag products are really helping foster that. For us in Illinois, about 2/3, we estimate that about 2/3 of the soybeans in Illinois are exported. So obviously containers are such a foundational part, and obviously the river is as well, but we're talking about containers here. This is such a crucial part of our work, goes into finding these markets, developing these markets, and containers are such a great way to do it. If there's anything I can convey here today, what I really have seen so much over the last 5 years is what containers truly bring, is they answer the question regarding quality. So as we see a global trend, and this is in, and I travel pretty extensively, this is in countries that we would figure to be a little less economically exciting to those that are quite economically doing well and providing good having a great GDP and that sort of thing. What we find is there's such a trend for a reliance on understanding where products are coming from and how they're getting there. And containers are such a great answer for that trend. For us, what we see is it reduces the handling, which is really essential in the overall movements. It is less probability of some development of fungi, foreign materials, and splits and that sort of thing. But again, as we see consumers demanding to know where products are coming from and how they're getting there, containers are absolutely essential. And that's not just for standardized grain, it's also for specialty grains, specialty crops that maybe some of you guys are familiar with as well. I don't want to get into too much of that. So what we did when we sort of put together the program, we wanted to ask why containers. And some of the efficiencies that we see in what container shipments offer is, as I mentioned, access to markets. So bulk markets obviously are able to get to many markets and service a lot of customers all over the world. What we have found in containers is not all of those small or medium-sized buyers can get involved in that sort of business. So they have to rely either being less competitive, they kind of get what the big bulk shippers are giving them, and they can't quite create what I would consider an excellent business plan. So they're not getting what they want, quite simply. And containers sort of provide that option. It also provides a great deal of buyer flexibility. For a lot of our buyers that we find, particularly in Asia and Southeast Asia, is they don't have massive bin space, they don't have exceptional storage, so containers provide them with the opportunity to have fast transits, and it allows them to get what they want in sort of a timely fashion. And many of them are small or medium-sized buyers. As far as their economics are concerned, they don't have to finance 50,000, 60,000 tons. As I mentioned, the improved quality. So again, what we focus so much on, particularly for us in Illinois, is improved quality expectations. We want our buyers to get exactly what they want. So why now is a great question. I think a lot of us will talk about it here, and we will be here after if everybody else wants to talk a little bit more. But the sort of global trade outlook as it stands, and particularly trade related to China, has, we've seen such a massive decrease in soybeans going to China, and that's particularly those have been in bulk. While we work really hard and we constantly are working to try to rebuild that demand and get it back, which we're generally positive. Hope some of you guys are pretty positive about that coming again. We think now is really the time to aggressively work on our outlook in emerging markets and find those that are working well with containers now. Hopefully we can find ways for them to expand. But in those newer developing markets, places like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, and even Southeast Asia that are pretty well developed but still have some real opportunity to create new demand, to show them what we can actually provide as far as precisely what they need. and I mentioned it, and it's something we tout really consistently, is some of this work really goes into, we've seen a 40% increase in containerized shipments to Southeast Asia since 2014-15. I should put that on every slide probably, given how such good news it is. As I mentioned, some of the diversification, some of the success stories that we've seen, Indonesia is one of the more exciting, successful points that we work to. It's where I spend a great deal of my time working and putting efforts towards. Kind of since the early 2000s, very little soybeans were going to Indonesia. It was a pretty unexciting market. Since then, we've seen such an outstanding increase. As of now, they ship about 1.4 million metric tons to Indonesia, and that's one of those that are just, as I mentioned, perfect for containerized shipments. The vast majority of that moves by container because their expectations are quality-driven, timing-driven, and they find such a great usage from U.S. soybeans. So that has been one of the really great success stories that we really, like I said, tout pretty often all over the world, me personally. We also see some real expansion in Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia, and again, those are ones that I would consider to be really solidly developed markets, but there continue to be developing trends that we can meet as things progress, particularly as I mentioned regarding quality in particular. I guess just another great look at it is, given the overall trade landscape, as I mentioned, it's even more so now that the containers that come into the U.S. that are bringing goods, that are bringing electronics, tennis shoes, T-shirts, all that good stuff, even more so, they're leaving the U.S. empty because of some of these trade relationships, tariffs, and such. So we feel like soybeans are the great answer to that. Now, we know we've seen some different developments as far as China is concerned over the last couple of months, and some real exciting optimism. Again, what we see right now is the absolute perfect time to view containers to be the real opportunity to find these emerging markets. We have to foster every market, not just the big markets. So that's a lot of what we've been doing really over the last couple of years in particular. All right, so we'll have some questions kind of towards the end. I'm going to bring up these guys and get out of the spotlight here and let them jump on in. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker here. Derek Reed is a merchandiser for GFG Ag Services in Kansas City. He's worked for 15 years in various, with railroads, barge companies, steamship lines, containerized grain freight lanes to deliver U.S. commodities all over the world. I will say personally, he's a friend and a colleague. He is for sure one of the best at his job. He's always excellent as far as merchandise is concerned. He's one of these guys that are in this perfect position of knowing export markets really well, does a lot of the hard stuff here in the operations in the interior, and he's also involved with the export piece. So he was definitely the perfect guy for when we started these discussions here a year ago. So his current focus is on containerized shipments, predominantly to Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. Probably more importantly, which will probably give you guys a little bit more respect, is he's a farm guy. So he grew up on a farm in Southwest Missouri, and he'll happily tell you about all that good stuff. So I will introduce Derek Reed and begin his slides.
Thank you. I want to thank Eric and the Illinois Soybean Association for asking me to come and speak today. I grew up on a farm in Southwest Missouri, so I definitely understand the farming side of things, and I'm going to kind of explain the granular side of the operation of containers starting from the farm gate. So we are a small private company in Kansas City, Missouri, and we buy directly from the farmer, and we have country assets in the country, and we try to market our grain that we buy directly from the farmer all the way to the end user. And I'm going to kind of explain on the operation side and then kind of the trading side on how we do that. So we have country assets. We have country assets all throughout northwest Missouri and southwest Iowa and southeast Nebraska. We buy grain directly from the farmer. We bring it into what we call our inland grain system. And what we want to try to keep it as in-house as possible. And that's because that we can control quality that way. We can control where it's coming from. We know what kind of seed it's been because we are a full-service agronomy company as well. So we sell the seed to the farmer. We have a sister company that does all that. So we source it from the farm, we bring it into our inland system, and then that's actually a picture of our elevator in Kansas City. So it's, as you can see, it's an old wheat house. It's been there for a long time. We have converted it into a container loading operation. So as you can see, what used to be rail load outs, we've converted to load containers out. So what really changed the Kansas City market, like Eric had spoke about Chicago, Chicago's been loaded containers for a long time. Kansas City has as well, but 7 years ago when the railroads decided to upgrade their logistics parks in Kansas City, that really was a game changer for us. Kansas City had always kind of been a lack of container availability, and that's just because we didn't have the big import companies that Chicago and some of these other markets had. Well, that has changed drastically in the last 7 years. Ford's a big part of that. Amazon has came in. So we've added 12 million square feet of warehouse space, which is on the import side of the business. But where that's a big deal for us is that's that many more containers coming into Kansas City. And it's drastically growing, which has really changed our business. When I came to this company 6 years ago, 5% of what we did was exported, and 95% was just sold domestically. Now we export 95% of our soybeans in containers. So we've really changed that market, and we've grown along with Kansas City on the import side of things, and that's continuing to grow. They're wanting to add 6 million more square feet of space in Kansas City, which will be that many more containers coming in. Once we bring it into our facility, what makes us unique is most transload facilities don't have a lot of space. We have 6 million bushels of space, so we're able to bring a lot of farmer beans in, and we can store them and IP them, and then we get consistent customers that want the same bean all the time, and that's what makes us unusual from most transloading facilities. Now, there's more cost that goes involved with storing that grain over a longer period of time, but we have found to build premiums in the market for that by being consistent to our customer. We run all of our own hopper trucks, which kind of is another unique thing. We can really control and know where that grain comes from. And once we bring it in, we have all of our own dredge trucks too. So we control everything from the farm gate to when we deliver it to the railroad logistics park. That is actually a picture of the BN yard in Kansas City, which has grown rapidly. Okay, what makes Kansas City pretty unique too is we can hit all 5 Class 1 railroads. So we can go East Coast, West Coast, and also south. Very little does go south, but we do have the KCS railroad in town. So we service the West Coast via the UP and the BN, and we can service the East Coast via the NS and the CSX. That's a really nice thing to have because as I'll get into here later, and I'm sure Sal will talk about as well, the logistical challenges that we're facing right now with some of the things going on around the world. If everything is going west and something happens on the West Coast, we can shift everything and ship it East Coast. If something happens on the East Coast, like we've had hurricanes and stuff like that, we can ship it to the West Coast. So we're very dynamic being right in the middle of the United States where we can go both directions, which is a big advantage for us. Once we deliver it to the ramp, it goes on a train. This is a APL train on the UP heading to the West Coast. Then it goes on the boat. It gets on the boat in Long Beach or LA, or if we're going East Coast, we'll go Savannah or Norfolk or New York or Wilmington. And then it goes directly to the destination customer. What's different about containers and what's nice, like Eric touched on, we have several customers that don't have the pocketbooks to buy even if it's a smaller vessel, a grocery boat or something. They don't have the pocketbooks to do that on a weekly basis. So they like buying 20 and 40 lot containers at a time, and it's consistent, and it shows up every week. And we'll ship them off both coasts when we have different shipment periods, and that way that we try to do our best to land every week. Because those containers get to a port in these smaller countries, and they will get on a lot of times rail or barge, but most of the time truck, and they will drive that container directly to the end user in that country. And so that container of beans, once it's containerized at our elevator, doesn't get opened up until it's at the end user. And they really like that. They know where it comes from. It's consistent. And that's what kind of makes containers unique as opposed to vessels. So what's good and bad is that we have to find the niche markets. We're not the big... We're not the headline grabbing when they spoke earlier today when there's 1 million metric tons of grain sold to China or 500,000 tons of sorghum sold. We're not the headline grabbing stuff. We're the little stuff that adds up over time that we hit all these niche markets to. Okay, so here's just a map. I always like to show this. It just gives us kind of a visual. So the black dots there are a lot of the inland ports. Now, there's not containerized grain in big volumes at all these ports, but like Eric touched about, Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis, Memphis, those are a lot of where things are loaded. And this kind of gives you a visual. Long Beach and LA are obviously the big volume ports on the West Coast for us in grain, but it kind of gives you a visual on the East Coast too. Port Elizabeth, Norfolk, Charleston, Savannah. When we rail stuff East Coast, that's a lot of times where it goes. And I'm sure Sal will touch on some of the stuff about New Orleans. I'll leave that for him to talk about later. That's a new venture that is exciting as well. Okay, so one thing I wanted to touch on that Eric and I were talking about, competitive markets that we watch. So we want to make sure that we are competitive in the market to the farmer, and we also want to make sure that we're giving value to our customers overseas as well. So we have a lot of markets we have to watch. So in particular in Kansas City, I'm keeping an eye on the SIF-NOLA market every day, what barge freight's doing, how that backs up to St. Louis and Quincy, because that's a competitive market for us. And then we have the Arkansas River, which isn't shown on here, but the Ark River comes all the way back up to Tulsa, and that's a big market for our beans as well. So those are the markets I'm watching on a daily basis, as well as soybean processing plants throughout the Midwest, shuttle loading facilities in our area, barge loading facilities in our area, and then other container loading facilities around the United States. It's all about freight, and so we have to make sure, it's my job to stay competitive in the Kansas City to give good value to my farmers. I need to know what's going on and what's trading in the Columbus, Ohio Valley markets, Chicago markets, East Coast markets, run that freight, bring it back to Kansas City, and make sure that we're staying competitive. It's our job to negotiate freight rates with the steamship lines to make sure that we're staying competitive, and that has helped us in Kansas City as more volume of containers comes in, gives us more leverage, and our customers like our product, so they demand it on the destination side, which also helps us. So currently right now there's a lot of challenges. I could have made probably 4 slides just about challenges right now with everything that's going on, but I just kind of wanted to give you guys some ideas. There's challenges in all logistics and all shipping aspects of grain, but some that are interesting and in particular to containers. So in 2014-15, we had the port strike on the West Coast. I don't know if any of you remember that or not, but 28 ports up and down the West Coast had a port strike. That was a huge deal for us because we had a lot of grain sold. Our customers had a lot of grain bought. They wanted it to come West Coast. Taiwan is a big buyer of our grain out of Kansas City. That they're a West Coast only player. So that drastically changed our game. We had to ship containers east, go through the Panama Canal. It cost us a lot of freight, but we wanted to make sure we got there for our customers on that. But that is a challenge that was unpredictable, and things like that happen in our business. Weather has been a big one, in particular to my neck of the woods. If anybody's from that area, the I-29 is an interstate that runs from Kansas City to Omaha. It was shut down for months. The entire interstate was shut down because of the floods. So that is a challenge. We had to route trucking 70, 80, 90 miles out of the way to get our soybeans down to our facility in Kansas City. So those are challenges that we have, which affects our containers as well, because the railroads were flooded out, so a lot of the routing had to change. I mean, we were routing containers to Ontario and then back up to Tacoma, Washington, instead of going Long Beach because they couldn't get through the tracks because of the floods. African swine flu is, as you guys know, that's been a challenge. Well, what's interesting about that in our world, it was more of a challenge for us outside of China. And I know that might sound crazy, but Vietnam is a big market for us, and they're a big container market. And so as the African swine flu spread and got into Vietnam, it decimated their hog population, as it did in China. But we felt it a lot more on the container part of it in Vietnam than we did in China, because that's such a big market for us. They take a lot of specialized beans into Vietnam, and that really was a challenge for us. And Vietnam had to figure out how to overcome that. The trade war, everybody, like you said, enough said on that. That was a challenge for us. But to what Eric talked about, what was interesting for our market is we have found more new niche markets since the trade wars happened than before, because along the steamship lines, the buyers, the shippers, everyone had to figure out other ways to get beans. Because if you think about it, a lot of the markets we were not in, Brazil was supplying those beans. Well, then Brazil started supplying China with everything. So all these other customers had to come and find new markets. And the good thing is we have kept those markets. And I hope we will continue to keep those markets. A lot of them, Bangladesh, Myanmar, countries like that we were not shipping to before have become big customers of ours. So I always tell people, yeah, trade war has been a challenge, but good things come from it. Most recently, the coronavirus. We are in the middle of that right now. To give you guys an example, it's obviously slowed China's economy, but the thing that's challenged us, and Sal will probably touch on this, he would know more about it than I, but the vessels cannot stop at any of these other ports right now if they've been at a Chinese port 14 days prior. Okay, if you think about that, on how intertwined, like Eric talked about, the entire world is right now, it has turned our world upside down. There is vessel skips, there's vessel cancellations. I read just on a wire before here, there's been 48 vessel cancellations in Long Beach alone. I've heard there's been 100 canceled already on the West Coast. Those aren't firm numbers. That's just rumors I've heard off the wire. But what that's done to us is we get bookings every week to ship containers, and they have spots on a boat. It's just no different than when you book a plane ticket. You got a spot on that flight. Well, half of those vessels are getting taken out of service because they can't stop at these countries because they've been at a Chinese port 14 days prior. There's also 50 to 60 of them sitting outside of China that are waiting to get unloaded. Well, those have empty containers of imports that are coming our way that need to get reloaded with tennis shoes to come back so we can put them back with soybeans. So one challenge that we are hearing that we think is going to be something we're going to have to overcome is in the next 30 to 60 days, we're going to see the container availability in the U.S. on empty containers drop because there are no imports coming in right now. I'm sure the headline grabbing news is Target, Walmart, Amazon's not getting their imports right now. What you're not going to see in the news is the empty containers from those are what we stuffed beans back in. So that's a challenge that we are already looking at other ways to mitigate that. We're looking at trying to diversify our shipments to as many different ports as possible to try to minimize that. So yeah, we'll save questions at the end, but that's everything I got. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Derek. Yeah, I mentioned that there's some real excitement in it, but it doesn't come without challenges for sure. I'd say as well developed as the container markets are, both operations like Derek and some of that Sal's involved with as well, what you're going to see is continued advancements in getting containers back here over the next few months. I do think it's going to be some challenges, but if anybody can react, it's definitely the logistical supply chain that does what we do so well. So a lot of exciting pieces of that. All right, I'm going to make sure we save a little bit of time for some questions at the end. Our final speaker is Sal Latrico. Sal is the CEO for APCT and is a member of APH Executive Management Team. He graduated from State University of New York Maritime College in 1977. That's the year before I was born. So, I'm an old guy. With bachelor's in science degree in maritime transportation management, as a commissioned ensign in the U.S. Navy, licensed in third mate oceans unlimited tonnage, and a master's license for 1,600 DRT vessels. He is a subject matter expert in all things related to global maritime, and we were really excited to have him here. So, no further ado, I'll bring up Sal.
You didn't have to mention the year I graduated. You could have left that out. Good afternoon. On behalf of American Patriot Holdings, Port of Plaquemines, which is about 50 miles south of New Orleans, and our strategic sister ports in the Midwest, I appreciate the opportunity to tell our story. And we are going to tell our story today. We're introducing a new waterborne alternative to containerized transportation. This is an opportunity to add value to the supply chain and also for you, I think, offer reliable cost solutions and direct savings to you. We've been working with the ag community for about 2.5 years. The Soy Transportation Coalition, Mike Steenhook, and Illinois Soy Association, Scott Sigmund directly for, like I said, about 2.5 years. I'll talk about it more in my presentation. I've got 15 minutes to cover a lot of materials, so bear with me. I promised I'd get through it, but I do want to tell you our story. So what is this new alternative? Predominantly containers out of the Midwest move west and eastbound. Very small amount go through the south. We're creating a new north-south trade pattern, and I'll talk about the reason why, but our new system is a system. It starts with a true gateway terminal down at Plaquemines Parish, which is fully connected, fully intermodal, connected to strategic locations in the Midwest, containerized terminals, and then connected to our container armed vessel. And collectively, this brings the lowest landed cost that you can have. Now, why are we doing that? There's a lot of reasons. One of it is, if you look at the future and the forecast, there's tremendous maritime growth projected, driven by global population growth, GDP growth, and energy demand. Also, let's look at historically, what's out there historically. When you look at the Panama Canal was the bottleneck, the reason there was a west-east trade pattern. 6% of the cargo went through the Panama Canal into the Gulf region, into the lower Mississippi River. Container vessels are measured by how many TEUs, 20-foot equivalent containers they can carry. Before the expansion of the canal, 5,000 TEU vessels were the largest they could carry. Look at our footprint for the Midwest. 40% landmass, 15% GDP, over 200 million metric tons of export. The Midwest is a big player. Were they getting the best price? Were they getting the best optimization of logistics? Is a new option required? Does the size of container vessel matter? If you can connect it to a new system that can add value, the answer is yes. At the end of the 60s, the first container vessels were about 1,500 TEU. Then they grew 5,000, 8,000, 15,000. They're now building 24,000 TEU ships, probably capped at 25,000. Does that matter? Absolutely. The economy of scales are phenomenal. Can you get that vessel into the Mississippi River? Yes. Is there a place to take it? No. But we're going to do that. And that's where the Midwest is going to take advantage. And that's where you're going to get some savings, and that's what we're going to talk about. So everybody understands what the Midwest is offering. These big ships create some issues. And everybody's trying to vie for how do we get the big ships into our ports. What are the ocean carriers doing? The ocean carriers are consolidating. They've created these alliances. They're pooling their assets together. They're pooling the slots on their vessels together. They're trying to lower their cost, but they're expecting the terminals to do the same thing. Not happening. Derek talked about the West Coast and some of the delays. You got union issues. You got automation issues. Those issues aren't going away. Those ships, the 10,000, 8,000, 10,000, took a day, day and a half to offload and load. These 15, 18,000 are now taking 3 days to load and offload. So it's creating a compounded effect. So it creates issues. In the Gulf, the existing terminals that are there today are built for smaller vessels. They have expansion issues, and there's growing dwell and intermodal delays. Dwell time is cargo sitting on the ground not moving. Intermodal delays are average speed of rail or truck slower than it's supposed to be, whether it be breakdown or what have you. So, what happened? Panama Canal expanded. It went from 5,000 TEU ships to 18,000 TEU ships. You think we can get some economy of scales from that? Absolutely. The Suez Canal added a second channel. They went from 23 vessels to 97 vessels a day. Significant opportunities. Larger vessels will offer cost efficiencies, 25% or better, but the ports have got to do things. The terminals have to add to that. It takes longer to go through the Panama Canal, but that deviation is offset relative to these growing dwell time and delays, which are not going away. So I like this chart. What it really shows in simple terms, number one, it is an imaginary line. Before the expansion, anything to the east of that went to the east coast, anything to the west of that went to the west coast. When the Panama Canal expanded, basically it moved that line 500 miles and it put the put the Midwest in what they call the sweet spot. And everybody is like, holy mackerel, look at this. If you use 15,000 TEU ships, you can pick up about 65% of the footprint of the U.S. If you use 20,000, you can pick up about 75%, going south through the Mississippi River. Economies of scale. What are some of the issues that are out there? You wouldn't be sitting in this room looking for alternatives if there weren't issues out there. I'm not going to go through this, but there's handling issues, there's cost issues, there's performance issues. I think you all agree there are issues today with logistics. The remedies are you need a new system. We need to treat customers as customers. We need to have loading at the docks would be faster. We can minimize that. Best-in-class technology, chassis, guaranteed chassis pools. There's a lot of things that can be done. I'm not going to go through it because I don't have the time. But at the end of the day, being able to create a new system, you can create the efficiencies so that you can get the savings, which is what this represents. So our system starts again with our gateway terminal. Our gateway terminal in Plaquemines, I'll give everybody this presentation. You don't have to worry about taking pictures. You all can have it. Our LAG, Louisiana Gulf Gateway, is the deepest, widest part of the river. No operational constraints. Today, the largest container vessel that can go up to New Orleans is 8,000 TEU vessel. We can take it Plaquemines 20,000 plus, deepest, widest part. Inland Marine, which our container vessel, we have an exclusive agreement with Port of Plaquemines. 6 Class 1 railroads, connectivity to major highway and air connectivity. So it's truly a regional hub for the shipper. They have choices, and this is about choices and the best cost. This is what it's going to look like at a full build-out. Phase 3 full build-out. Fully intermodal connectivity. 3 20,000 plus TEU ships, 2 of our vessels, 7 unit trains, warehouse distribution, refrigeration. I mean, this is the real deal. Our vessels, what are we bringing to the table? We're going to connect a dedicated container on vessel to a dedicated ocean fleet. This is our vessel. This is what we call a container on vessel. Container on vessel on the bow, I don't have a pointer, but all the way up forward on the bow is our patented, what we call zero wake, we optimize our speed. It's zero wake bow design. So we optimize our speed. This vessel goes 13 miles an hour upriver against 4 to 5 miles an hour. Regular towboats go to 4 or 5 miles an hour. Huge competitive advantage. No wake. So from a bank erosion environmentally, this is great for all of us. The white bar that goes across is what we call a patented exoskeleton hull design. What's important is we can load more cargo. This vessel loads about 2,400 TEU on a 9-foot draft. And what's equally important, this is LNG. It's green. This is how it's being done today, utilizing coal and grain barges. It works for short distance. You can only move a few. Use cherry pickers. This model doesn't work because those big ships are not going to wait on cargo. High cargo, you need high volume, high speed to get the cost low enough to feed those big ships that are going to be down at Plaquemines. We have 2 classes of vessels. The liner vessel, which is, you can see its length. Again, its efficiency is 13 miles an hour. This carries about 2,400 TEU. Diversified cargo. It can carry refrigerated cargo as well. 3 round trips before it fuels. For the vessels that go through tributary rivers, Arkansas River, Missouri River, this is built a little lower, a little less profile to go under the bridges and through the locks. The locks are 600 by 110. This is 595 by 100. Same efficiencies. Carries a little bit less cargo, 1,700, but goes 13 miles an hour upriver. Very efficient, does the job. Let's talk about our strategic Midwest partners, which complements the system. We don't have just MOUs. Our ports are not in competition with each other because we're offering a system to our customers. So whatever we need to do as a team, joint marketing initiatives. So this includes St. Louis, Kansas City, Jefferson City, Memphis, Cairo, Western Arkansas Intermodal is Fort Smith and Van Buren, Little Rock and Joliet, and Dallas, which is not on here, that should be on here, are all our strategic sister ports. Here's our conceptual designs that all of our partners are working on to take this to fruition. Here's St. Louis. Here's Kansas City, who's really moving along on their project. Heartland, which is Jefferson City, Missouri. Memphis. Here's some of our economic advantages. Okay, we went and did 2 third-party studies. One was done by Informa Economics and funded by the Soy Transportation Coalition and Illinois Soy Association. And the other was by CK Americas. The Illinois Soy Association and STC looked at taking agricultural products from the Midwest, utilizing either rail or truck from the Midwest to West Coast, put it on an ocean vessel to Asia, compared to Midwest, our vessel, through the Port of Plaquemines on an ocean vessel to Asia. What were the conclusions? Significant savings from an all-water route. So we were much cost-effective than rail or truck. It takes longer to go through the Panama Canal, but that was offset because of the average delays in dwell time. In fact, if you go on STC's website or ISA, is it still on your website, Scott? STC's website. The report is on their website, and there's also one page on there for net landed days. On average, the all-water route is faster than intermodal. New all-water route systems should increase demand for containerized cargo versus bulk, non-GMO chain of custody, and buyers can purchase smaller volumes, which Eric talked about, and better for distribution destination. Our average savings, anywhere from 33 to 44% for the inland portion. I would think that that's a pretty good starting point for savings. CK Americas. CK Americas looked at imports and exports. This is a complicated chart. I'm going to uncomplicate it. This is basically looking at FEUs, 40-foot containers. If you were coming in for the port of LA and going to go to Memphis, there's a 26% savings and 5 days savings. If you're going to export out of to Shanghai from Memphis, you're looking at a 73% savings, 3 days savings. This is my last slide. So where are we with the project? Right now, we're looking at, for the terminal upriver marine operations to commence 2 years from the time we do what we call FID, Final Investment Decision. We're making that now. No later than the third quarter of this year, potentially second quarter of this year. We are in strong discussions with a global ocean carrier and global terminal operator who wants to be part of our project, significantly wants to be part of it, and wants to invest in the project. That's how much they believe in us. We've already started the due diligence process for that, which includes looking at making sure that we are a common carrier, modern terminal technology, as much automation as possible, no legacy contracts, which means you don't start getting into some of the stuff the West Coast is involved in, because those are about legacy contracts. Without legacy contracts, you don't have to have some of that. Also, flexible work rules and so forth. Assessment of our upriver terminals. Last year, during the high water conditions, we looked at all of our sister ports and said, if we were in operation today, how would we have been impacted? And if there was any impact, how do we adjust our plan so we don't have those issues? Our vessels, basically, we have approval to go to the shipyards for construction. We're working on several MOUs with some very key shippers that have long-term volume and time associated with them, which will be able to have us to go to the bank to be able to invest in this project and make this project move forward. So our timeline is as follows. By third quarter of this year, start the development of the Port of Plaquemines, award shipyard contracts, and certain shipyards, key shipyards in the certain terminals in the Midwest start the project as far as construction, and be in operation by third quarter of 2022. So 2 years from the time we put shovel in the ground for what we call phase one operation, which is weekly service, one vessel. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Sal. I think our goal was really simple in our presentations. I'm a New Orleans guy. I like to keep things really nice and easy and simple. It's part of our culture. What we really wanted to do was kind of convey how containers are moving now. I think Derek had a great example. It's pretty exciting to hear an operation as big as Derek's just in 5 years went to 95% in exports. That's a pretty telling sign about overall trends. Obviously, the farmers in that region saw the opportunities. They're certainly making improved margins, right? Their turn back for them are obviously improved. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. So the efficiencies have come along with. And then, obviously, secondarily, not by any lesser amount, we wanted Sal to come and talk about what some of the new potential exciting pieces. We're of the mold that we have to continue finding the efficiencies, not continuing to do things as they've been done, because they can always be improved, to find a goal to make the best value back for U.S. farmers. So these are some great guys up here to discuss that. So Sal took way too much extra time, but we'll forgive him. It was some great info. But we wanted to take a few minutes to have a few questions. And I was just joking on that, Sal. It was some good info. So let's take a few questions. Hopefully we got some good ones. We got a few figuring.
Containers. Are we saving money because they're a haulback versus loading the boat?
Yeah, and maybe we'll have a couple of quick answers on it. Absolutely. So containers are what we call a backhaul. They're the for the container lines, they're the ugly stepchild of their freight matrix. So for sure, it is for them an opportunity to get some freight savings in going back and putting U.S. products. What we have found over the last 15, 20 years that grains, U.S. grains, soybeans especially, have been an excellent opportunity in that. So there's some real partnerships there for sure. I don't know if Derek has more to add. He can certainly do.
Well, just one interesting thing was to take one quick step back is these containers used to go back empty, all of them, and they couldn't have an entire ship of empty containers, so they actually had to fill them with water, a certain percentage of them, to weigh the boat down because the boat could not go back 100% empty. So there was actually a cost in that. So when it first started, they actually took them back for free.
I remember.
That didn't last very long.
No.
But there was that one time where you could get your container to go back because the steamship line was just excited to have weight in it. And obviously that was many years ago,
Yeah.
but that's turned into, it's still, to answer your question, yes, it's a backhaul. But they like having the weight in those containers to stabilize their vessels.
Yeah, it maximizes their efficiencies for sure.
I'd like to
please.
add to that as well. There's another component of that. It's repositioning. There's some that are displaced, like Chicago, and the cost to move them to a location to load is very expensive, so they sit. We're offering, and this is where our discussions with some of the ocean carriers have been very fruitful, and the added value that we're going to bring, and I didn't add it to my presentation because it would have taken more time, and I didn't do it, is our repositioning cost. For us to move it from point A to point B, from one of our locations to where to be determined, we're still determining where a good location for the farmers would be to reload. That might be Kansas City. It could be a bunch of different places. Where can we put it? And then that cost is very nominal compared to what they're doing or what their alternatives are today. Will make it work. And that has been very exciting for the ocean carriers because they haven't had that alternative. It opens a whole bunch of different doors and access to a bunch of different containers. So we're pretty excited about that. And it's a great question, by the way.
Yeah. Please, go ahead.
Question, interesting stuff, thank you. Regarding the inland waterways, what's the minimal depth for the vessels to move down the waterway?
Another good question. The controlling depth is 9 feet, the navigable depth. They always dredge to 12, and you've got to manage that 12 to 9. So it's prudent on the owners and operators and the crews to manage that 9 feet. So everybody goes by 9 feet. So you've got to watch the 9 feet compared to high water and low water conditions. Our vessels are capable to go to 7 feet to 10 feet. So we have flexibility. We've designed our vessels for that, especially for, say, the Missouri River, where there's some issues coming into the Missouri River. And we spent a lot of time looking at that before we designed the vessel. Great question.
Yes, your presentation was heavy on the Midwest. I'm from Montana. What would be the logistics in getting, obviously, I don't know, I have access to rail, but I mean, that's kind of the waterway, obviously, is the more efficient way to do that. Is there a way to get Montana involved, I guess?
Yeah, there's a thing called winter. But what we've decided to do right now, what we've decided to do is take our first blush, our first strategic footprint to get this started and make sure that we could branch out, because we're not going to put something down and not be able to do it. Whatever we do, we're going to do, and we're going to do it right and get it done. We've been asked about that. It's not the first time. Minneapolis, we've been asked about that. So that's our second phase to look at. There are challenges in the wintertime, obviously. Our vessel barges that are put together with wires, the answer is absolutely no. We're one vessel. So there's a big difference when you go on top of ice and how you can manage that versus barges that have wires. They can't handle that. So the answer is I can't say absolutely we'll never do it. At this moment in time, that's our second phase that we will take a look at. So I think there's hope to say we'll take a peek at it and look at it. That's the best I can do for the moment.
I'd add, just from the container logistics standpoint, and maybe you're familiar, some of that happens now. It may not be a great deal in the way of soybeans, but there are other commodities that move out of Montana and the surrounding states on rail, predominantly to the PNW, but you've seen a real expansion from the Canadian railboats, both CN and CP, that move out by container, absolutely servicing some of the markets in Asia for sure. And I'm happy to share some of that. If there's definitely some, a lot of that has become some real specialties type products as well. That the pulses are a great example. It's no reason why beans can't fall in line there too. So there's some real expansion there, potential. Please go ahead.
Derek, you talked about the soybeans predominantly in your presentation. Is there any other grains, row crops you're working with to ship via containers? And what type of premiums are farmers seeing for soybeans or maybe possibly other crops to help their bottom line through containerized shipping?
Yeah, we definitely do more than just soybeans. We kind of focused more on that today. But sorghum is actually one that we do a lot of. The thing with containers and sorghum is when China's in the market, everyone else is in the market. And when they're not, we don't export a lot of it when they're not in. But that is changing right now. With the trade war getting signed, I think we'll be shipping milo in containers by the summer. So that is probably the second biggest thing that we ship. Corn is a very big product in containers. The problem in specific to Kansas City is we're too close to the feed markets. We're too the Arkansas chicken markets, and we had in the feed yards in Kansas, and then there's a lot of hog feeders around. We're just too close to end users, being that far south. It doesn't work very often. Chicago is a place that does a lot of corn, but sorghum is definitely a player in Kansas City, because there's not sorghum grown in a lot of the other container loading places around the U.S. So that's a unique thing that we have. It's just it's kind of a very niche market. So.
What do you see for premiums for farmers? What can they?
Yeah, I mean,
for value added.
Like Eric talked about when I was talking about our flip and how we've exported everything. We are always competitive with the local processing market and have consistently brought more value to the farmer. I mean, as far as cents per bushel, it's all different compared to every farmer. But to say that we have flipped it to where we export 95%, it has definitely been a value add for the farmer locally in our market. So.
Yeah, absolutely. There you go. Please. No, it's you.
What percentage of your soybeans that are going out in containers is non-GMO? And the second part of my question is, how are containers and that kind of business reported in exports?
Take a step.
Yeah, we do export non-GMO beans. It is still a small market. Part of the reason is the extra premiums that non-GMO comes into. A lot of the countries that we ship to don't have the pocketbooks for that, so that is still done a lot on more of a barge basis and shipped down the river. But it is a growing market. I think it still has more growth that happen. A lot of it goes on in Chicago. There's just not as many grown in our draw area, and I think that'll change. But that is and the organics is another one. It's a very, very small market, but that is another one that's growing good percentages.
Yeah, I'd say in addition, as Derek mentioned, you see some, it's been a market that it has existed for quite some time. It's one of those where there's a bit more forethought, both from farmers, and they generally need sort of a buy-in from buyers. So we're seeing some opportunities and some connectivity there for us, particularly as Derek mentioned, Illinois. So there's a bit more work that goes in. The premiums can be substantial for sure, and it's pretty specific to a market, pretty specific to a farm, and the logistics involved. But there's a real continued expansion, and similar to what I mentioned kind of at the beginning, where people are kind of wanting something a little bit different and maybe a little more unique, whether it's non-GM, organic, or if they simply want to know where it's coming from and kind of get to know the farm and the region more closely. That's what we've seen that's what I hear everywhere I go is more of a trend and a demand for that, quite honestly. And what was your second question?
How is all these container sales reported as export?
You go ahead, please.
So every week, it's no different than the sales that are reported that you guys read about with the bigger tonnage. But when you export something, you have a 921 cert that gets reported to the government. And so every week, those container sales are on there. They're not the big flash news lines that everyone reads about, but they're all reported in the export numbers.
For all the big grains, they're all reported to the USDA. Ah. All right, we have some more questions. We're happy to stick around. I think they're going to kick us out here any second, but absolutely, it was part of why we came. We're definitely, I think these guys will stick around a few. There's actually an evaluation form as well. We would love if you guys took a few seconds to fill out. As I mentioned, we'll stick around for some more questions and just chat and meet you guys if that's possible. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate your time.